Hello and welcome to the dosing video. Woo, finally. Today we are going to be talking about how to dose your edibles and answering the age-old question, how much weed is in that? How much weed should I use? How much weed did you use? All of the above. That's what we're going to be talking about today. I would consider this like 101, like this is the basics. So if you've never dosed an edible before, this is the video for you. And if you like kind of know a little bit about THC and milligrams and all that kind of stuff, I will put timestamps in the description so you can skip ahead as needed. And as you can see, this is a little bit of a different format of video than what we kind of like normally do here. I thought it'd be better to have a visual element than to have me just like talking about numbers to you. So I did make a PowerPoint and we are going to do this webinar style. So let me share my screen and we will get started. All right, so as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about how to dose your edibles. And I did want to put a disclaimer down here. We are going to be doing math based on the percent THC of your weed or concentrate, whatever you're using. But if you want to get the most accurate dosing, you can buy an at-home testing kit, such as the T-Check machine or something like that. I don't typically use them because they have such mixed reviews, honestly, and it's a couple $100. And to me, I feel like I get pretty close. I have done side-by-side, tests using edibles that I've made with this dosing method and store-bought edibles, in particular gummies. And I get pretty close. So I would say, this is a good way to do it. But if you really, feel like you need some science behind there and you need a machine to confirm it for you, they do make at-home testing kits. So I just wanted to say that up front. And now we will get started. So to start, we first need to figure out what is 1 milligram of THC. You're going to hear edibles commonly referred to as containing blank milligrams of THC. So 50 milligrams of THC, whatever it is. What is a milligram of THC? A milligram is a unit of weight. So 1 milligram is equal to 1,000th of a gram. So there are 1,000 milligrams in a gram. So that is true for anything. 1 gram of water is 1,000 milligrams of water and vice versa. And so since we know that 1 gram of weed is 1,000 milligrams of weed. But that weed is not all THC. That 1 gram of weed is made up of a bunch of plant stuff, like, cells and shit. Science people, let me know in the comments. And then also THC, which is the chemical that gets you high. So the THC or CBD, I guess, let me say that you can kind of sub in CBD for THC in any of the equations that we're going to be working with if you're making CBD edibles. So CBD doesn't get you high, but it has medicinal properties, blah, blah. Basically, whether you're working with THC or CBD, this is kind of true. So I'm going to be saying THC, but you can sub that in and out as needed. Anyway, our 1 gram of weed is going to be made up of mostly plant matter and then some of THC, which is the chemical that we're trying to isolate when we're, infusing things. So we are hoping to infuse our butter, oil, whatever it is, with that THC, and that's what's going to get us high. So that's kind of the weight that matters. Of that 1,000 milligrams that we have, we only care about the milligrams that are THC. So in this example of this little pie chart right here, 1/4 of it is THC. So 25% of it is THC. So as an example, if we had 1 gram of weed with 25% THC, we would get 250 milligrams of THC. So to back up a little, we know that 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams. So we have 1,000 milligrams of weed, only 25% or 1/4 of it is THC. So in that 1 gram of weed, we have 250 milligrams of THC. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing when we're dosing. So we will continue on. How do we find the percent THC of our weed? And it's going to be really easy. Ready? It's on the label. If you are buying your weed from a store, they are heavily regulating, percent THCs and that sort of stuff. So it's going to be really easy to find. So it's either going to be on the label, on the container. It might be on a little card in front of the weed before you buy it. Or it might be on the brand of weed's website. You can look up the brand of weed that you're using, and they typically have all of their products listed with the percent THC and CBD. or you can find it on the store's website. So go to whatever your dispensary store is, and it's probably going to have all the stats of all the weed that they're selling on the website. But what if we're not exactly buying weed from a store? What if we're not necessarily going to a dispensary for our weed? Then how do we know the percent THC? We can Google it, maybe. So if you know at least like what strain it is or something like that, you can often Google, percent THC of Blue Dream, whatever it is. So if you are able to identify the strain, you can Google it. If you're not really able to identify the strain, we're going to make some assumptions. So I got this from Leafly, but it is kind of common around the internet to see people say 18 to 20% is kind of the sweet spot for mid-range weed. Now, if you are using really fancy weed, maybe you want to assume a little bit higher. If it's unlabeled weed, I guess you can kind of gauge the niceness by like smell and consistency and stickiness and all of that kind of stuff. But typically, I would say 18 to 20% or even 15 to 20% is a good range to kind of assume when making edibles with unlabeled weed. So if you have like a mid-grade weed, you're probably in the 18 to 20% range. But again, as you see here, it can go up to, the 30s, and it can get as low as like 10 or 15%. So keep that in mind. Now, if you are really new to edibles and you are using unmarked weed, unlabeled weed, I would assume a higher percent THC. So I would go ahead and assume maybe 20, 25%, because you can always take more. And if you're new at it, I don't want you to like take too much the first time. And then the opposite goes for if you are kind of an OG, you do edibles all the time and you're using unlabeled weed, you might want to assume a little bit less. You might want to assume 15% and then be pleasantly surprised. So when we are working with unlabeled weed, I typically just assume 20%. But if it's unlabeled, you're kind of like going at your own risk. So keep that in mind. If you're new to it, maybe assume a little bit higher just to be safe. So now let's talk about how much weed should you use. And we're going to start with dosing with flower or bud, and then we will move into concentrates or like wax next. So we're going to start by asking ourselves a few questions. How many edibles are you making? How many milligrams of THC do you want in each edible? And this is going to give us the total milligrams of THC we need for our batch. And we will do this equation, so multiplying the number of edibles times our desired milligrams of THC in each edible to get the total milligrams of THC needed for our batch. So as an example, if I want 12 cookies with 50 milligrams each, I'll do 12 times 50, and I know I need 600 milligrams of THC for my whole batch of cookies. So again, for 12 cookies with 50 milligrams each, we need 600 milligrams of THC, and now we are going to identify our percent THC of our weed. Then we'll do this equation. So our total milligrams needed for our recipe divided by the percent THC of the weed we are using divided by 1,000. And that's going to give us the grams of weed needed for this recipe. So for an example, if we are using weed that is 20% THC, we're going to take 600 and divide that by 20% or 0.2, which is 20% in decimal form. And that's going to give us 3,000, which is the milligrams of weed we need. So divide that by 1,000 and we get 3 grams of weed. So we need 3 grams of 20% THC weed to make 12 cookies with 50 milligrams each. So here are those two equations again. The top one is going to give you the total milligrams of THC you need for the recipe, and then the bottom one's turning that into the grams of weed you need for the recipe. So screenshot this, write this down, whatever you need to do. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I always think this would be kind of fun to like print out and then laminate, and then you can like do it with an expo marker every time you're making edibles. Maybe that will be my merch one day. Stay tuned. A dosing worksheet, I don't know. But anyway, if you have any questions, put them in the comments. And then if you saw this math and you were like, girl, I could do this all day, head down to the comments and help out anybody who has a question. Thank you. So now let's talk about if you are using concentrate or wax. I'm going to be calling it wax. I know that there are different concentrates that are not wax, but I'm going to keep saying it, so don't get too mad at me. So this is going to be first, I'm going to have two slides, two different equations. This first one is going to be if you are using the whole container of your concentrate, and then you want to know how many milligrams of THC each of your edibles is after you've used the whole container. And the reason I'm starting there is because wax is pretty hard to weigh out. So I usually just kind of do the whole container and then put it into oil or butter or whatever, and do it that way just because it's, it's so sticky. It's really difficult to weigh out, more so than bud. But the next slide, we'll be kind of doing it the same as the flower equation. So starting with a particular dosage in mind, and then figuring out how much wax or concentrate you need to weigh out to get that specific dosage that you want. So we'll be doing both ways. The next is the next slide. So to start, again, we are going to ask ourselves a couple of questions. First, how much wax do I have? And you'll commonly see it sold in like a half gram or a gram. So we will still be working from grams to milligrams with the wax. Next, what is the percent THC of your wax? And this is, again, going to be on the label. So if you're like, I don't know, what's the percent THC of my wax? It's on the little jar, or it's on the little, packet that it came in. Or you can, again, check with the store, check with the brand. If you are using unlabeled wax, I didn't put a slide on here about this because there are so many different concentrates. So you might be using distillate, you might be using resin, you might be using those little rocks. I don't remember what they're called right now. You would want to first identify what kind of concentrate you're using, and then same sort of thing, just Google like percent THC of live resin of blah, 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 and it will give you a range. So same as with the flower, you're gonna, kind of do a little guesswork if it's unmarked concentrate, but I didn't want to give like a specific percent that we're working with because there are so many different concentrates. Like distillate, it's probably going to be close to 100%, and like shatter, it might be 70% THC. So Google the type of concentrate you are using. And lastly, how many edibles are you making? And then comes our nice equation. So we are going to take the milligrams of wax times the percent THC of the wax or concentrate that we're using, divided by the number of edibles we made. And that's going to give us the milligrams of THC per edible. So as an example, if we have 1 gram of wax, we know this, 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams. And same for if you have a half gram of wax, it's going to be 500 milligrams. So take your grams of wax and multiply it by 1,000, and that's going to give us our milligrams of wax. So for this example, we're using 1 gram or 1,000 milligrams of wax. And that wax has 75% THC in this example. And then we're going to make 30 candies with it. So we'll take 1,000 times 75% or 0.75, and then we'll divide that by our number of edibles, so 30, and that's going to give us 25 milligrams of THC per edible. Again, this is if you're using the whole little container of wax. So next, now we are going to go over if you are starting with a specific dose in mind and then figuring out how much of your concentrate to weigh out, keeping that dosage in mind to get the desired dosage. So once again, we're going to start by asking ourselves a couple of questions. How many edibles are you making? How many milligrams of THC do you want in each of those edibles? And then what is the percent THC of your wax? Then we'll do this equation. So our number of edibles multiplied by the milligrams of THC per edible divided by the percent THC of the concentrate we're using is going to give us the milligrams of wax or concentrate needed for our recipe. So as an example, if I am making 20 cookies and I want 50 milligrams in each of those cookies, and my wax is 80% THC, I'm going to take 20 times 50, and that's going to give me the milligrams of THC I need for my recipe. And then I'll divide that by 0.8, which is 80% in decimal form, to get the milligrams of wax I need for the recipe. So in this example, I need 1,250 milligrams of my concentrate to make my edibles. And you might be thinking, oh my God, my concentrate is listed in grams. What do I do? You know this, you know what to do. Divide it by 1,000. So to get our milligrams into grams, we are dividing by 1,000, and we need 1¼ grams of wax, 1.25 grams of wax for this example. So here are those two equations again. The top one, once again, is if you're using the whole container of concentrate, and that bottom one is if you have a specific dose that you're going for and you're just going to weigh out your concentrate to get that dose. So again, take a screenshot, write it down, whatever you need to do. If you have any questions about dosing with wax, let me know in the comments. And again, if you see this and you're like, girl, this is the easiest math I've ever seen, head down to the comments and answer some people's questions. So next, I thought we could go over some common dosing questions. These are the ones that I get asked the most. So I thought these would be good to go over. Starting with, does all of the THC get infused into the edible? Probably not, unfortunately. So there are kind of like a lot of factors that go into this, and there's not really a general scientific consensus. Unfortunately, it's unregulated right now since it's not federally legal. So you'll kind of see some conflicting studies, conflicting opinions on this. But I would say the general thought amongst people who kind of do this all the time is that no, you do lose some. And this is not really like science. This is just my own anecdote here. You're always going to have a little bit of butter left on the weed. So if you're using concentrate, that's not the case, but you're going to have, if you're using actual bud, there's going to be some in the crevices of the bud that you're not going to get. So already you're losing some there. But it is noted on most of the kind of like big websites that you do lose some in the infusing process anyways. So even if I got, every little bit of butter off of that weed, I still probably wouldn't have all of the THC out of the plant. This is from T-Check, which is one of the at-home dosing machines. And they mentioned that about 60 to 90% is coming over into your infused product. But they do give some, ways to get to that 90%, to get to the higher percent. So thoroughly decarbing your weed, I talk about that a lot. That is very important for infusing. Also, how long you're going to be infusing your butter. You want to make sure you're cooking it, like it says here, over low heat for several hours. And then how well you're kind of like mixing that up, how well you're stirring it throughout the infusion. And they mentioned that the type of butter you use or the type of fat you use is important. And I saw that mentioned in several other places as well. So this is from the High Times, where they were doing an experiment using different kinds of fats, different oils and butters and that sort of thing. And they found that clarified butter got the most of the THC out. But again, they even had in this same article, it's really hard to get consistent results from different labs because there is no regulation around this. There's not like best practices put in place quite yet because it is not federally legal. So vote for legalization. Thank you. That's the summary of this slide. Our next common question is, how many milligrams should I take? Or like, how much should I eat? How much of this should I consume? And this is kind of another one with some nuance around it. Unfortunately, it's hard to say because everybody has a different tolerance and everyone is going to be affected differently by weed. So THC, but same for CBD. You might feel it a little harder than your friend does or vice versa. So there are several things to kind of take into account when figuring out your dose, such as how often do you smoke and how much are you smoking each of those times. So not just how often you smoke, you might say, I smoke every day. But what does that mean? Are you just hitting a G right before bed, or are you smoking like 12 joints throughout the day? That's very different. And your tolerance is going to really come into play when figuring out your correct edibles dose. And another one is, how much do you weigh? I know this might be kind of like, what are you talking about? But it's similar to drinking. A larger person could have 6 beers and be fine, and a smaller person could have 6 beers and be fucked, So same kind of goes here. But I will say tolerance is something to take into account. Those first 2 questions have to be grouped in, because if that larger person never drinks, they might be the one who gets fucked up. And if this smaller person, drinks all the time, they might be able to drink a little bit more. So same sort of thing is going for weed. If you weigh a lot, you might need a little bit more unless you have never done it before. Then I would still say start really small. Another thing a lot of people do not take into account is if you have eaten before you take the edible. I have noticed, I don't know if this is scientific, but I have noticed if I eat before, I don't feel it quite as hard. So I guess maybe that's similar to drinking as well. Like if you eat before you go out to drink, you don't get as drunk. I think similar rules apply. So keep that in mind. If I wake up first thing in the morning and eat an edible before I've smoked or before I've eaten or anything like that, I'm going to get a lot more high than if I take an edible for dessert after dinner, you know? So a lot of things to kind of consider, and you have to consider all of these factors together. But it is always safest to start really low and eat more as needed. Remember that you can always eat more. You can always eat another cookie or take another gummy or whatever, but you can never uneat it. So keep that in mind. I don't mean to sound ominous when I say that, but you'll always hear at the end of my videos, I say, just eat half if you need to. And keep in mind, it can take 2 to 3 hours for edibles to fully set in. I'm not making that shit up. That is for real. Don't just eat another cookie because you didn't feel it 10 minutes later or you're going to be sad. So always start small, eat half, and you can eat more if you need to. And that leads into our next common question. What if I take too much? Don't worry if you do, just lay down, stay calm, and remember that it will pass. You are okay, I promise you. I mean, probably you are, unless there's other things going on. I don't want to give some sweeping statement. You know, if you're just high, like if it was only an edible that you were dealing with, you're going to be okay. You are not going to die. It's just weed. You don't need to go to the ER. You do not need to call an ambulance. You're not going to die. If the only thing you have done is eaten an edible, you are okay. It is very, very hard to overdose on weed. Hello, I am editing and I figured I should probably back up this statement that you're probably okay. So this is from the CDC marijuana FAQs, and it says, is it possible to overdose? And then they also include having a bad reaction. Yes, you might have a bad reaction, but is it possible to overdose? It says it's very unlikely, but you might have some unpleasant effects. So I would say like these are kind of like the symptoms of greening out. So you might be, you know, a little bit nervous, anxious, paranoid, if you take way too much. And that's where you kind of want to just like stay calm, think to yourself, I'm fine, this is going to pass in a couple of hours. But they do mention that it can be a little bit trickier when using edibles or beverages or something like that, because it does take a while to hit. So keep that in mind. Again, edibles are going to take a little while to hit, so you always want to start small, but even the CDC is saying that you're probably not overdosing. So it's okay. Unless you've done other stuff. Again, let me make another disclaimer. If the only thing is the weed, you're okay. If you've dabbled in other things and mixed it with the weed, maybe you want to call somebody. I don't know. You do what you need to do. You might have a hangover feeling the next day, so keep that in mind. I have not really experienced this much, but I have had some friends who don't smoke quite as much feel a little bit high the next day still, or like feel a little bit hungover, but great excuse to get a huge breakfast. I'm a big breakfast guy, so to me, this is a pro. We're pros all around. You know, you got a good nap, you got a good breakfast the next day. What's not to like? The moral of this story is if you take too much, take less next time. You don't need to swear off edibles. You know, if you like ate too much ice cream and then got sick from all the ice cream, you wouldn't be like, oh, I'm never eating ice cream ever again. You would just not eat that much next time. So same thing applies here. If you took a little bit too much this time, make note of how much that was and like at minimum half it next time. You know, work your way up. Again, start small. You don't need to impress anybody. You don't need to make the cookies 50 milligrams just because that's what I did in the video or that's what the recipe says or whatever. You can custom dose it to your preferred dose. And I encourage you to do that because while you will be okay if you green out, it's very uncomfortable. And if you're a noob, it's real freaky. Honestly, I greened out when I was new and I was kind of like, ew, what's going on? So you're right to be a little nervous if this happens to you, but you will be okay. You will be okay. So, in conclusion, start small, be safe. I do not recommend mixing substances. I also don't really recommend taking substances anyway. I'm not promoting weed usage on this channel. I'm just saying, like, if you were already going to do it, let me tell you how to do it like this. If you already wanted to make an edible, you might as well make a cool one. That's what this is. I'm not encouraging anyone to smoke weed, okay? Weed is only cool if you think it's cool. Consult your doctor if needed. So if you have medical conditions, if you're unsure how much to take and you're taking this medically, call up your doctor. They're going to be able to tell you. And I probably should have mentioned before, but in the medical settings, I often see doses as low as 2.5 milligrams or 5 milligrams is really common. So really, you are going to be starting small if you are doing this medicinally. And you should start small either way. I know I've said it a million times, but I just really want to drive that point home. Start at the very bottom and just eat more if you need to. And finally, don't pressure yourself to eat too much. You don't need to keep up with everyone around you. And don't pressure anybody else to eat an edible if they don't want to, or you're going to have a bad time. Okay. Greening out is not a good time. You don't need to do it. That you can very safely consume edibles and consume a small amount and find out your own dose and find out, what works well for you to achieve the high that you want. And then just, do that every time. So might be a little bit of trial at the beginning of figuring out what the right dose for you is. But once you've got it, you're set. And that concludes our dosing video. Again, if you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comments and just let me know what you thought of this. I have a lot of weed information. I just don't know what you guys want to know. So if there's other topics that you're confused about or something like that, I'm happy to give you my knowledge and then research it or, whatever. So let me know what you thought of this video, this style of video, more of the like informational series. Maybe we'll do like a weed 101 course. I don't know. Tell me what you think. And I guess that's it. If you want to find me on Instagram, you can. I'll link all that stuff in the description. If you're about to make edibles, check out the channel. I have several recipes, and there's also a lot of other really great edibles channels online. So play around, have fun, and be careful. Overall, be safe. And yeah, bye.